A few years back, there was a murder at my friend's apartment building. I won't mention the location or the name of the building, since people still live there, you know? The victim was a man. In the middle of the night, he was chased by someone wielding a long, thin-bladed kitchen knife. He ran along the outdoor corridor of the apartment building, and finally, he was stabbed to death on the landing of the open-air staircase. My friend heard that voice. Someone ran past his room door, calling for help. The voice was too weak to be called a scream, repeatedly uttering, "Help! Help!" My friend slightly opened the door, keeping the security chain in place, and saw drops of blood trailing along the corridor. He thought, "Oh shit, this is bad." But when he listened carefully, he couldn't hear the voice anymore. He wondered, is the guy dead? Or maybe he took a taxi to the hospital? It might sound stupid, but apparently, when you encounter something so unbelievable, that's the kind of stuff that pops into your head. He figured someone must have called the police or an ambulance with all that commotion, but he couldn't hear any sirens. He was debating whether to go check it out before making a call himself, thinking it might be dangerous when he finally heard the sound of emergency vehicle sirens. Later, he heard from the police that there was only one call reporting the incident. It came from someone who had just returned home and discovered the gruesome scene. From the news reports that came out later, I don't think the victim would have survived, even if someone had called earlier. He had been stabbed in multiple vital spots. It was shortly after this incident that I went to visit my friend. As we were passing the open-air staircase, he told me, "They say this is where he died." Then he pointed at the floor of the landing and asked if I could tell what it was. Looking closely at where he was pointing, I saw that the vinyl floor covering had several holes in it. When I asked, "What about it?" he explained the details. Apparently, the killer had straddled the victim as he lay there and repeatedly stabbed down with that same long, thin-bladed kitchen knife. The blade had gone through the body and hit the floor beneath. Looking closer, I could see many smaller holes as well. He said that after something like this happens, it's the auditory information that really gets to you. Visual stuff is surprisingly manageable, but the sounds are unbearable. They say that sounds really do stick with you. He said he remembers it every night. Just as he's about to fall asleep, he suddenly hears that feeble voice in his ear saying, "Help! Help!" He wakes up startled, and then for a while his heart races and he can't fall back asleep. Apparently, it's been like this for him ever since. The person in the apartment closest to the staircase apparently heard the sound of the stabbing. A sharp, unsettling sound like clack, clack. At first they could hear something like a weak voice going, "Ah, ah," but eventually that stopped, and only the clack, clack sound continued for a while. The person in the room had their ear pressed to the slightly opened mail slot in the door, but at the time they didn't know what the sound was. They thought about calling the police or an ambulance, but worried that if the attacker heard their voice on the phone, they might become the next target out of revenge. They considered going to the back room to make the call, but by then there were no more cries for help, just silence punctuated by the clack-clack sound. They were afraid that if they moved to the back room, the noise might give them away, and the attacker might call out, "What are you doing in there?" In the end, they just crouched by the entrance, unable to move. All the while, they could hear that clack-clack sound. Later, when they understood what that sound had been, it really messed them up. They couldn't get that sound out of their head and ended up moving out soon after. When I heard this story, the first thing I thought was, hey, if it's a rental, why don't you move out too? If it were me, I definitely couldn't handle staying there. In fact, after hearing this story, I started visiting my friend's place less often. But I still went there occasionally. This is a story from a different night. I got into the elevator in the entrance to go to my friend's room. I pressed the button for his floor, but the door wouldn't close. As I kept pressing the button, waiting for it to close, I suddenly felt like someone had gotten into the elevator with me. The box shook and sank a little, and I thought, huh? And my finger stopped pressing the button. I felt an unsettling sensation of being stared at by someone. A little later, there was another vibration, as if someone else had gotten on. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. Even though I knew there was no one else in the elevator besides me, I looked around the box. Of course, there was no one there, At that moment, the elevator door started to close. I instinctively reached out and stopped it from closing. Then I quickly stepped out. The elevator door, which had been about to close, remained open after that and showed no signs of closing. How can I explain the emotion of that moment? At that instant, it wasn't fear, but rather I pretended not to see, pretended not to notice, as if to say, "Please, come in." I averted my eyes from the elevator door that remained open and quickly walked out of the apartment building. As I hurried away with my back to the elevator, I felt a terror as if I was about to be embraced from behind. After experiencing this, I was reluctant to use the outdoor staircase, the scene of the murder, to get to my friend's room. So I called my friend from outside the apartment building. I honestly told him, "I'm scared, so come down and meet me." My friend didn't laugh. He came down using the outdoor staircase. I couldn't help but say, "Hey, aren't you scared passing through the murder scene?" He replied, "It's better than the elevator." He says that residual energy remains. He's talking about what happened in that elevator. On the day of the incident, the elevator was apparently covered in blood. He thinks the residual energy of the victim probably remains there. When I asked, "But if you say that, what about that landing?" My friend said, "There's probably no residual energy left there." The victim had stumbled onto the landing, dizzy from blood loss while fleeing, and was already in a daze when he was stabbed repeatedly. So he probably didn't have any strong emotions left to remain as residual energy. But the elevator is different. He doesn't know the exact details, but the killing started in the elevator. Whether the victim ducked in there while being chased or was pushed in as he was trying to get off, either way, he went through something truly horrible there, but still managed to get out somehow. Help! Help! That's why I think the strongest residual energy remains there. No one uses the elevator now. Needless to say, my friend moved out soon after that too.